In the dense woods of Northern California, a frantic search was underway for a missing 6-year-old boy. As search teams combed through miles of rugged terrain, hope was fading fast. But just when everyone feared the worst, something unbelievable happened. A tiny creature, a wild baby bobcat with tufted ears and amber eyes, appeared at the edge of the forest trail. And what it led them to, no one could have imagined. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a story of instinct, survival, and a bond beyond explanation. Stay with us. The day the forest swallowed a child. In the heart of every forest lies a secret. Sometimes it saves you, sometimes it tests you, and sometimes, it does both. When a walk turns into a nightmare. The soft rustling of redwood leaves whispered overhead, like nature breathing in its sleep. Morning light filtered through the towering trunks of Humboldt Redwood State Park, casting long beams of gold across the forest floor. It was the kind of place where time slowed down, where families came to escape and reconnect. Emily Carter adjusted the strap of her backpack and looked over her shoulder at her husband, Greg, who was crouched down near the fire pit, setting up the grill. Their 6-year-old son, Liam, stood a few feet away, bouncing on the balls of his feet with the kind of restless energy only young boys have. Liam was a curious soul. He had bright blue eyes that never stopped moving and a head full of unruly blonde curls that caught the sunlight like a halo. Shy around strangers but fearless in nature, he loved animals, bugs, birds, anything that moved. "Don't go far, sweetheart," Emily called gently, noticing Liam eyeing a butterfly flitting near a patch of wildflowers just beyond their campsite. "I won't," he chirped, already taking small, deliberate steps toward it. Emily smiled, reassured. The woods were dense but quiet, and the area was safe, or so she thought. Greg rose and wiped his hands on his jeans. "I'll check the water jugs," he said, nodding toward the nearby stream. Emily began unpacking sandwiches, humming softly. When she glanced up again, maybe 3 minutes later, Liam was gone. At first, she didn't panic. "Liam," she called out, her voice light. No answer. She moved toward where she'd last seen him, eyes scanning the underbrush. Still nothing. "Greg?" Her voice cracked slightly now. "Do you see him?" Greg dropped the jug and started walking fast, then running. The panic in his chest bloomed like wildfire. "Liam." But the only sound was the whisper of wind through the trees. They searched for 15 minutes, calling, whistling, combing the woods surrounding their camp. But it was like the earth had opened and swallowed their boy whole. There were no obvious tracks, no screams, no signs of struggle. Just emptiness. By the time Greg pulled out his radio and called for backup, Emily was on her knees, her arms wrapped around herself like she could hold her world together if she squeezed hard enough. The rangers responded quickly. Greg's long-standing role as a local park ranger meant they didn't waste time with formalities. Within an hour, the search was fully underway. Ranger Carla James was the first to arrive. 42, wiry and tough, with short silver hair and eyes that seemed to pierce through bark and bone, she didn't waste words. "Tell me everything," she said sharply, pulling out a topographic map. Greg ran through the timeline with military precision. Emily stood by, silent, her eyes hollow with fear. "Red shirt, khaki shorts, Spider-Man sneakers," Greg finished, his voice tight. Carla nodded. "We'll start grid search immediately. Dogs are en route." By late afternoon, over a dozen volunteers, hikers, and off-duty rangers had joined the search. They combed the area in sweeping zigzags, calling Liam's name until their voices went hoarse. Drones were deployed. A thermal imaging unit from Eureka was requested. Every hour felt like a dagger twisting in Emily's chest. Meanwhile, Greg kept walking, retracing Liam's last steps, trying to imagine what a 6-year-old might have seen, followed, or feared. A butterfly. A squirrel. A hidden trail? The sun began to dip behind the redwoods, and with it came a creeping dread no one dared voice out loud. Night was falling. At the temporary command post near the trailhead, Carla rubbed her temples and stared at the growing circle on the map. He couldn't have gone more than half a mile in that time. But the terrain, she trailed off. The trees were dense, and the elevation unpredictable. Then she looked up. "Did you say there are mountain lions in this area?" Greg's jaw clenched. "A few sightings over the years. Mostly north near Panther Ridge. Nothing recent." Carla nodded grimly. "Still, we need to be ready for anything." As floodlights were assembled and emergency tents set up, Emily sat wrapped in a blanket, rocking slightly. She hadn't spoken in over an hour. Greg stood a few feet away, arms folded, trying to hold back the raw scream building inside his chest. That's when a soft rustle came from the edge of the woods. Not a bird. Not a branch. Something, watching. Unseen. Silent. And that something had 4 legs. But no one noticed it yet. No one saw the golden glint in its eyes, or the small shadow weaving quietly between the trees. Because in the chaos of the human world, sometimes the answers come not from maps or radios, but from the wild itself. The wildcat that shouldn't be there. Not all who wander are lost, and not all guides wear uniforms. A stranger in the trees. By nightfall, the search area had expanded beyond the Carter family's original campsite. Flashlights bobbed through the underbrush, casting jittery shadows that danced like ghosts between the trees. Radios crackled with clipped updates. No sign on the northern ridge. Negative at Creek Bend. Check in every 15. Still, no one had found even a shred of Liam's trail. At 8:37 p.m., Ranger Carla James stood at the base of a narrow ravine, squinting into the gathering dark. She'd been in the redwoods for over 20 years and had seen more than her share of missing hikers, animal encounters, and, unfortunately, tragedies. But something about this felt different. She knelt beside a muddy patch, scanning for footprints. Nothing. Just as she was about to radio in her position, one of the search dogs, an experienced bloodhound named Duke, growled low in his throat. Not a bark. A growl of confusion. "Easy, boy," Carla murmured, standing. That's when she saw it. A small figure perched silently at the edge of the clearing, half obscured by ferns and fog. It stood no more than 12 inches high at the shoulder, its body lean and agile. At first glance, it looked like a stray kitten, until it turned its head and revealed sharp cheek tufts, tufted ears, and golden eyes that glowed like embers. A wildcat. A bobcat kitten, to be exact. Not older than 3 months. Too young to be alone. Too small to be a threat. But it didn't run. It just stared. Carla stiffened. Bobcats were elusive. Fearful of humans. This one? It sat calmly, tail flicking, watching her. Measuring her. Strange, she muttered, nudging her flashlight lower. The cat didn't flinch at the light. Instead, it turned, slowly, deliberately, and padded back into the underbrush. Not in panic. Not in fear. It looked back once. Waited. Then moved again. Like it wanted her to follow. Carla hesitated. This wasn't standard search protocol, not by a long shot. But instincts, especially in the wild, weren't meant to be ignored. She clicked her radio. Unit 3. James. I'm diverting from grid to investigate a behavioral anomaly near the South Ravine. ETA check-in, 20 minutes. Copy that, the voice on the other end replied. Be safe. She looked back at Duke. The bloodhound's ears were low, tail tucked, but he didn't resist as she gently nudged him along. They followed the kitten. The trail wasn't a trail at all. It weaved between thickets of blackberries and fallen branches, forcing Carla to duck and push her way through. Several times she lost sight of the wildcat, only for it to pause ahead and glance back at her with eerie focus. It was surreal, like being led by a ghost of the forest. Suddenly, Duke barked. Once. Sharp. Alert. Carla stopped dead. Up ahead, caught in the beam of her flashlight, something fluttered in a branch. A small red scrap. Her breath hitched. She moved closer and reached out with trembling fingers. A piece of cloth, torn, tangled in the bark of a pine branch. Red cotton, sun-bleached. It matched the color of Liam's t-shirt. Heart racing, she dropped to her knees, scanning the forest floor. Beside a twisted root, almost hidden beneath dead leaves, were tiny footprints. Barefoot. Left and right. Fresh. "James to base," she said, pressing her radio hard. "I've got signs of the boy. About 400 feet south-southwest of the South Ravine. I'm continuing on foot. Immediate backup requested." "Copy that. Units en route." As she stood, her flashlight flicked over the wildcat again. It was sitting, waiting, just ahead. And just like that, this wasn't a missing person case anymore. This was something else entirely. The forest had sent them a guide, for legs, soft paws, amber eyes, and it was leading them somewhere no human had ever dared to go alone. Into the unknown. Sometimes the path to truth is carved not by boots, but by paws. The unmarked path. Carla James had walked thousands of miles through forest trails, rocky outcrops, and hidden clearings over her 2-decade career. But never like this. Never with a wild animal leading the way like a silent compass. The baby bobcat moved ahead of her, nimble and swift, weaving through twisted trunks and dense thickets as if the forest had been designed for it alone. Carla pushed branches out of her path, careful to keep her eyes on the creature and her feet on the uneven terrain. Beside her, Duke, the bloodhound, followed with a low whine, every sense alert. This wasn't a trail. It was a forgotten route carved by nature, untouched, raw, and wild. Fallen trees formed arches overhead. Ferns reached up to her knees. Every few steps, a root threatened to catch her boot and send her tumbling. But she didn't stop. Somewhere ahead, she could feel it, there was something waiting. Not just the missing boy. Something more. About 200 feet in, the bobcat paused atop a ridge of moss-covered rock and looked back at her again. Its gold eyes shimmered in the beam of her flashlight. "You've got my full attention, little one," she whispered, breath short from the climb. She moved past a narrow crevice in the earth and suddenly gasped. The land dropped steeply into a hidden gulch below, a slope too sharp to see from the standard trails, completely obscured from satellite imagery and drone scans. And there, on the steep slope, were marks, light but distinct. Slide patterns. Like someone had fallen or slid down. She crouched at the edge. The soil was soft and disturbed, small handprints pressed into the earth. Her heart raced. "Liam," she murmured. Duke sniffed the edge and let out a low, sharp bark. Suddenly, the bobcat darted down the gulch with quick, agile leaps, almost vanishing in the thick foliage. Carla hesitated only a second. Then she followed. The descent was treacherous. Carla leaned back to balance, boots skidding slightly over loose gravel and pine needles. Branches whipped against her jacket. The air was cooler down here, heavier, like it had been waiting centuries to be stirred. Halfway down, her foot caught a stone. She slipped, gritting her teeth as she caught herself against a tree trunk. Still ahead, the bobcat waited, sitting on a flat rock, its body perfectly still. Carla blinked. They had reached the bottom. And something was close. A scent hung in the air. Earthy. Damp. She turned off her radio. The silence was deeper than before. And somewhere beyond that silence, something stirred. The bobcat rose again and padded forward, toward the thickets on the other side of the gulch. Carla steadied herself, heart pounding. Because the further she followed, the clearer it became, this wild animal hadn't stumbled upon Liam by accident. It knew exactly where it was going. Traces in the leaves. A single thread of evidence can unravel the impossible, if you're brave enough to follow it. Carla stepped carefully into the lower basin of the gulch, her boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. The bobcat moved just ahead, weaving through brambles with feline grace, tail low, ears twitching. The deeper they went, the quieter the forest became, no rustling birds, no scurrying squirrels, only the soft crunch of her steps and the occasional snort from Duke behind her. And then she saw it. To the left of an ancient tree, partially buried beneath a bed of pine needles, lay something unmistakable. A red baseball cap. Carla froze. Her breath caught in her chest as she crouched beside it. The brim was torn slightly, and the cap was damp with dew. But she recognized it immediately. She had memorized every detail from the photo Emily Carter had handed her hours earlier. Liam's favorite cap. Spider-Man logo faded on the front. She picked it up gently and turned toward Duke. "Track," she whispered. The dog sniffed the cap and moved forward, nose close to the ground. His body stiffened as he picked up the scent trail. A few feet farther, Carla spotted more evidence, threads of red cotton clinging to a jagged branch. She looked closer and saw a trail of broken twigs leading up a slope to her right, almost invisible unless you were standing in exactly the right spot. She followed it. Every few feet, she found more signs, a muddy handprint on a low rock, a faint scuff mark in the dirt, as if someone had dragged their foot while crawling. He was hurt, she realized. Likely injured his ankle or leg. That would explain the erratic path. But he was alive. Somehow, through the cold and fear and wilderness, Liam had kept moving. Duke barked again, short, sharp, focused. Just ahead, the bobcat stood still, watching them. Then it turned and padded up another rise in the terrain. Carla moved faster now, slipping between narrow trees and ducking under a low-hanging limb. Her flashlight flicked across the landscape. Then she saw something strange. Nestled between two large boulders ahead was a natural rock wall, covered in moss and ivy. But in the center, almost invisible behind the growth, was a dark opening. No bigger than a crawl space. Roughly 2 feet high. The bobcat sat just outside it. Silent. Waiting. Carla stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Oh my God, it's a cave." She dropped to her knees and listened. For a few long seconds, there was only the sound of her breath. Then, a sound from within. A soft, shivering whimper. Carla's pulse thundered in her ears. She clicked her radio back on, but her voice came out shaky, full of awe. "I found him. I think I found him." And as she crawled into the unknown, the bobcat remained behind, its job, it seemed, nearly complete. The cave beneath the earth. Some shelters are built by human hands. Others are shaped by nature for miracles. Discovery of the cave. The entrance to the cave was low and narrow, almost entirely hidden beneath a curtain of ivy and moss. Carla lay on her stomach, flashlight clutched tightly in one hand, Duke whimpering quietly behind her. The bobcat remained perched on a boulder above, still and watching, like a sentinel. She drew a breath and inched forward. The damp earth pressed cold against her chest as she crawled inside. The space was tighter than she'd hoped, just enough room to squeeze through on elbows and knees. Dust and ancient air filled her lungs. The beam of her flashlight pierced the dark ahead. The temperature dropped noticeably inside the cave. It was quiet. Still. The kind of stillness that almost roared in her ears. 10 feet in, the tunnel opened into a small chamber, no bigger than a backyard shed. The ground was soft with old leaves and dry moss. At first, she saw nothing. Then, movement. In the far corner, a small bundle trembled. Carla's breath caught. She raised the light slowly. Liam. He was curled in a fetal position, barefoot, his arms wrapped tightly around his knees. His red t-shirt was torn and muddy, one Spider-Man sneaker missing, the other dangling loosely from his foot. His blonde hair was matted with dirt, and his lips were pale and cracked. But he was breathing. Alive. Liam, she whispered. His eyes fluttered open. For a moment, confusion clouded his gaze, then fear. Hey, Carla said gently, voice shaking with relief. I'm here to help. You're safe now. Liam's voice was barely audible. The kitty kept me warm. Carla's eyes welled. She turned to look behind her, back toward the entrance where the bobcat still waited, unmoving, like it understood its role had come to an end. She pressed her radio. James to base. I've located the child. Alive. Cold, possibly dehydrated. I need med support and evac at the Gulch Trail entry. Send backup now. A pause. Then the dispatch voice, copy that. Help is on the way. Carla looked down at the little boy again. You're going home, sweetheart. But the story Liam would soon tell, the one about the creature that stayed by his side and guided the rescuers, wasn't just a tale of survival. It was a glimpse into something deeper. Something wild. Something unexplainably real. The Wildcat's watch. When all hope disappears, sometimes it's the wild that brings it back. Wrapped in a thermal blanket and held gently in Carla's arms, Liam was quiet as the search team reached them, 2 paramedics, 2 rangers, and Greg Carter, his father, sprinting faster than any of them down the gulch path. Greg dropped to his knees the second he saw Liam, his hands trembling as he touched his son's face. I got you, buddy. I got you, he choked out, holding Liam close. Emily arrived minutes later, her cries breaking the still forest silence as she collapsed beside her family. The reunion was raw, powerful, nature itself seemed to exhale. But amidst the tears and relief, Carla noticed Liam's eyes kept darting toward the rocks above. She helped me, he whispered. The kitty. Greg blinked. Kitty? Liam nodded, his voice still hoarse. A little cat. Not like the ones in books. Her ears were pointy. She stayed with me all night. She was warm, she didn't leave. Carla looked up, but the bobcat was gone. She was right there, Liam said, pointing. When I cried, she licked my face. I tried to follow her before I got stuck in the cave. I think she was showing me where to go. Paramedics began checking Liam's vitals. Aside from minor dehydration, a bruised ankle, and a few scrapes, he was remarkably okay. Miraculously okay. Later, back at the field medical station, Carla asked Liam again about the Wildcat. Was she big? She asked gently, holding a cup of warm broth to his lips. He shook his head. Like a puppy, but with cat feet. Her eyes were gold. I wasn't scared. She didn't try to hurt you? No. She was nice. When I was cold, she curled next to me. She made this little sound, like humming. Carla sat back, stunned. A bobcat, a juvenile no older than 3 months, had stayed with a human child, comforted him, protected him, and ultimately led rescuers straight to him. Not out of instinct. Not by chance. But with intent. Back in the gulch, rangers had scoured the area. They found faint tracks confirming the bobcat's presence, small, padded prints near the cave mouth. No other predators. No signs of a den. No signs of a mother. She was alone. Yet somehow, not lost. The story made headlines across the country, sparking debates and disbelief. But in the eyes of one child and the ranger who followed his lead, the question was no longer how the wildcat helped, but why. The watcher in the trees. Some visitors leave tracks. Others leave something behind that never fades. 3 days after Liam's rescue, Carla returned alone to the gulch. The search teams were gone. The temporary command tents dismantled. The news vans had moved on, chasing fresher headlines. But Carla couldn't let go. Something about the encounter with the wildcat gnawed at her, not with fear, but with awe. It wasn't just behavior. It was something closer to purpose. She followed the same path she'd taken with Duke, tracing her steps through the narrow break in the trees, down the moss-slick ridge, and into the hollow where the cave mouth still yawned like an ancient secret. There were no signs of Liam now. Just silence, wind, and the weight of memory. She crouched by the rock where the bobcat had first paused, where it had looked back at her, waiting. It wasn't an accident, she murmured aloud. The forest said nothing. But then, movement. Soft. Graceful. Carla slowly turned her head. There, 20 feet away, half blurred in shadow, stood the young bobcat. Taller now. Stronger. Its coat shimmered in the filtered morning light, golden brown with black streaks, tail twitching slightly. Still young, but different. Wiser. They locked eyes. Carla didn't move. The bobcat didn't run. Instead, it sat. Just sat. Like it had that first night. A long moment passed between them, no sound but the breeze and the distant creak of the redwoods. Then, with a quiet turn of its head, the wildcat rose, padded back into the underbrush, and vanished. Carla stood still for several minutes, heart pounding in a rhythm not born of fear, but reverence. Back at the ranger station that evening, she wrote a brief log entry. Observed bobcat at gulch perimeter, appears to be same juvenile. No signs of aggression. Behavior suggested awareness, recognition. Unprovoked. Peaceful. Some questions, I suppose, aren't meant to be answered. But the memory of that moment, and everything the bobcat had done, would ripple far beyond that forest. Because what began as a simple rescue soon became a story that would change how people saw the wild, and themselves. What the wild taught us. The forest gave us back a child, but it also gave us something deeper, a reason to believe. The story of Liam Carter's survival, and the wildcat that saved him, spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, news stations were broadcasting the footage of the tearful reunion. Interviews with Greg and Emily aired on every major network. He was just there, lying in that cave, Emily said, eyes glassy. And when they asked him how he survived, he said, "The kitty stayed with me." It was a line that struck hearts across the country. Within a week, a wildlife camera crew from Los Angeles requested access to Humboldt redwoods. Carla turned them down. She wasn't interested in sensationalizing something she still didn't understand. But curiosity had already taken root. Animal behaviorists began weighing in, some dismissing the story as coincidence. Others weren't so sure. Dr. Lena McAllister, a senior wildlife biologist at UC Davis, spoke on a live podcast. Bobcats are fiercely solitary and avoid human contact, she said. Especially juveniles without maternal guidance. For one to stay near a child, not just without aggression, but with warmth and protection? That's uncharted behavior. She paused. Maybe there's something we've forgotten in our study of nature, something instinct can't always explain. While the experts debated, Liam returned home. Wrapped in quilts, surrounded by stuffed animals, and flanked by his parents, he seemed like any other 6-year-old who'd had a strange dream. But every time he was asked about the forest, his answers remained the same. She stayed with me the whole time. She looked at me like Mom does when I'm sick. She didn't let the dark feel scary. Emily and Greg struggled to make sense of it. As a park ranger, Greg had always respected wildlife from a professional distance. This challenged everything he believed. One night, sitting on the porch with Carla, he broke the silence. "You think that cat knew what it was doing?" Carla stared out at the line of trees in the distance. "I don't think it matters what we believe," she said. "It knew something we didn't. It saw him, alone. And it stayed." Greg exhaled slowly. "I've tracked thousands of animals through these woods. Never once have I been tracked in return." They sat in silence, the night breeze whispering through the pine boughs. The park department later awarded Carla a special commendation, but she barely mentioned the award in interviews. Instead, she pushed for something else, an initiative. Within 2 months, Humboldt Redwoods launched the Wild Instinct Response Program, a new training module for rangers that focused not just on terrain and tactics, but on observing animal behavior during search efforts. Carla advocated that wild animal sightings during active searches be recorded, analyzed, and, when possible, followed. "We don't give nature enough credit," she told the board. "Sometimes it's not just watching. It's responding." Emily started a blog about their experience called Into the Wild with Liam. Her first post read, "I used to think humans were the protectors. That we watched over animals and kept them safe. But now I see, sometimes it's the other way around." The post was shared over 300,000 times in 3 days. People across the world sent Liam letters. Children drew crayon pictures of bobcats with capes. One letter came from a girl in Vermont who had been afraid to sleep alone, until she heard Liam's story. "I'm not scared anymore," she wrote. "I think the wild is watching too." As spring arrived, the forest began to bloom again. And though life slowly returned to normal, the Carters made one promise: they would return. They would walk those trails again. Not to relive the fear, but to honor what had happened. What had been returned to them. Liam, now stronger, with a permanent limp in his right ankle, insisted on it. "We have to go back," he said one night, tracing the outline of the wildcat he'd drawn in pencil. "She might be waiting." And so, they did. Because some stories don't end in the forest. They echo, passed from trees to hearts, from one generation to the next. A tale passed on. Some footprints disappear with the wind, others are carried by the soul. 1 year later, to the day, the Carter family returned to Humboldt Redwoods. The trail looked different now, not because the forest had changed, but because they had. What had once been a place of terror was now a symbol of resilience, of gratitude. And of something greater. Liam walked beside his parents, slower than before, his ankle still healing but his spirit unshaken. In his hand he carried something, a small red baseball cap, freshly cleaned, with new stitching along the brim. They reached the edge of the gulch just before noon. Sunlight streamed through the trees in golden shafts, dancing across the mossy floor. The same spot where, 1 year earlier, their world had nearly unraveled. Greg placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You sure you want to do this?" Liam nodded. "She helped me. I want to say thank you." They approached the boulder where the bobcat had last been seen. Liam stepped forward, placed the cap gently on the moss-covered stone, and whispered, "This is for you." He stood in silence for a moment, eyes scanning the woods, as if waiting for a flick of a tail or a golden glimmer through the leaves. Nothing moved. And yet, it didn't feel empty. Emily knelt beside him. "Even if we don't see her, she knows." Liam nodded slowly. "I think she's watching. Just not close." They stayed a while longer, sitting together, listening to the wind weave through the canopy above them. Then, as they stood to leave, Liam paused and looked back. Do you think she has a name? He asked. Greg smiled. If she does, I think you're the only one who knows it. Liam thought for a moment, then said softly, Hope. Carla, who had quietly joined them halfway through the hike, stood a few paces behind, hands in her pockets. She heard the name and smiled to herself. It fit. They left the cap on the rock, a quiet monument not just to a miracle, but to the bond between the untamed world and the human heart. In years to come, Carla would retell the story at ranger gatherings and training sessions. And each time, she'd end it the same way. Sometimes the forest swallows what we love. Sometimes, if we listen closely, it gives it back. And sometimes, just sometimes, it sends a guide. And in a quiet clearing in Northern California, if you looked closely enough, you might still spot a flash of gold eyes between the trees. Watching. Waiting. Remembering. In the heart of this incredible story lies a truth we often forget: kindness, protection, and connection can come from the most unexpected places. Whether it's a stranger offering help, or a wild creature stepping beyond instinct to guide us, we are never truly alone in this world. Liam's story reminds us to listen more closely to the world around us. Nature isn't just a backdrop, it's a living, breathing force, watching, waiting, and sometimes, reaching out to help. What if we allowed ourselves to trust more? To follow the quiet signs? To believe in things we can't always explain? At Paw Prints and Stories, we believe every animal has a voice, and every story carries a lesson. If this tale touched you, if it stirred something inside, then this is just the beginning. We invite you to join our journey and become part of a community that celebrates the bond between animals and humans, one story at a time. And here's a challenge for you. Next time life leads you somewhere unfamiliar, pause. Look around. Ask yourself, is this a dead end, or is something trying to guide me? You might be surprised who's watching from the shadows, waiting to lead you home.